Okay, so I'll start that again. So welcome everyone to Triangle Skeptics. This is the Skeptics in the Pub virtual version of Skeptics in the Pub for Triangle Skeptics, and this started during the pandemic, but we just continue it due to the fact that we have the ability to have speakers from other areas or other meetups join us. And today we're hosting Rob Palmer, who is right there from New Jersey. And so I'll just read a little bio on Rob. So Rob has had a diverse career in engineering, having worked as a spacecraft designer, computer programmer, and software systems engineer. Rob began writing for Skeptical Inquirer in 2018 and has over 60 articles published by Skeptical Inquirer in other publications and other publications. Rob writes about contemporary skeptical issues and has interviewed individuals as diverse as scientists Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins, and Druyan, Seth Andrews, and John Delancey. Rob has been a speaker for various skeptic and humanist groups, including Recovering from Religion. He has spoken at DragonCon and thrice at SciCon, the annual skeptical conference in Las Vegas. He has been interviewed on various podcasts and YouTube shows, including the Skeptic Zone, Big Picture Science, the Phil Ferguson Show, Banachek's Brain, 502 Conversations, Recovering from Religion, and The Thinking Atheist. It's a lot of podcasts that you've been on. So now we'll introduce Rob, and he's going to give us his talk on the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project.
Okay, so let me share my screen. I have to remember to share the sound because there's no way to default that to on. And can everybody see that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have, I have like tiles all over the front of it, the controls and the video screen. Do you have that, or is it clear?
No, it's clear.
Clear, yep.
Okay. Okay, so let me play a little audio clip first to make sure the audio is working, because I have another one later on, and also it's pertinent.
The psychics offer wonder and endless possibilities in a world that often seems difficult and mundane. They promise health, wealth, wisdom, eternal life. But if you examine the record, it's not the psychics, but the hard-nosed scientists who have actually delivered the things that improve human life.
So I hope most people recognize that famous voice. It's James Randi, for those who don't, grandfather of the skeptical movement, who passed on recently. So what he was saying there, basically, that like we can't trust the psychics. So this project, the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, set out to put some, data behind that claim. Is that true? Or are there any psychics who are actually, doing what they say, predicting the future? So this project involved a lot of things we're going to talk about here. And I'm going to give you right now basically what I'm going to talk about in order. I'm going to talk about what the project is, how we collected the data, how we scored the predictions, what the overall results were, talk about some specifics, also what misses happened, why people believe this stuff, what's the harm in people believing this stuff, talk a little bit about how we publicized our results, and closing thoughts. So first off, let me tell you what the project was. Right? It had the goal of gathering and reviewing enough data to be able to draw a valid conclusion as to whether individuals really possess the ability by psychic means to reliably foresee future events. Is clairvoyance real? The project was created and managed by Richard Saunders, a former president of the Australian Skeptics, who produces the Skeptic Zone podcast, one of the longest running skeptic podcasts out there. I was a member of the team. And so that's why today you're going to get an insider perspective on this unique investigation to see where the data leads us. So the project ran for about 12 years, and it was completed in 2021. It consisted of the collection and analysis of almost 4,000 psychic or otherwise paranormal predictions made by over 200 people in Australia, having knowledge, they claimed, of future events. Getting some extraneous audio, by the way, there, Romero. So somebody's not muted.
Okay, I'm gonna mute everyone.
Okay.
And then just to make sure, and then do we want to do it so that I'm the only one that can unmute, or should we do like a trivia?
Okay.
And then if you want to unmute yourself, just put it in the chat and I'll try to.
Okay. So as I said, the predictions are either psychic or otherwise paranormal. Let me explain that. The majority of these people claim psychic powers, but the data set includes predictions about their future attributed to or mixed in with other pseudoscientific divination methods, such as numerology and astrology and reading tea leaves, whatever, right? But for simplicity, all the people making these predictions, we call them psychics, and the predictions are called psychic predictions, to not put them in a bunch of different piles. To be included in this project, the predictions had to be published in Australian media, and we looked at a 21-year period starting with 2000. And importantly, we went into this investigation not as a debunking, it was an investigation, right? If the results were such that we found these people were clairvoyant, you would be hearing about that today. And we believe this is the largest such effort ever undertaken. So it starts with the data collection. Over many years, Richard Saunders, with some help, collected and archived all the predictions he found, right? And by archiving, I mean he wanted copies of everything, so if anything was questioned later, he didn't have to go look for it again. He put them on his computer, or he had physical copies, whatever the case may be. He started with stuff that was available in print publications, and started with the Psychics Directory from Australia. It was the first source he mined. He went to magazines and other print sources later. He went to the State Library of New South Wales, State Library of Victoria, and other places. And then also got recordings from predictions that were made on Australian radio, TV, or on YouTube by Australian psychics. So clearly this was a labor-intensive process. It took many, many, many years and thousands of hours. So once all of these were in Richard's database, he realized it would take a large effort to score these predictions that he was collecting. It started slowly. He got a team of Australian skeptics from that group together in 2016. They met in person to begin the scoring. Saunders continued the effort over years, but it was taking a very long time. So coincident with the pandemic, when everything was locked down, especially in Australia, in mid-2020, he reached out to Susan Gerbic, and she put together an international team of volunteers to complete the scoring on the project. So that's when I got involved. We met weekly on Zoom sessions run by Saunders. It was for well over a year. We researched and analyzed and assigned a score to every one of the predictions in Richard's database. So it's important to note they were scored collectively. We didn't divvy them up amongst ourselves. We had to agree on what the scoring was for each of the predictions. And as we worked, the actual number of predictions in Richard's database grew, because often a psychic will send out a stream of consciousness. A, B, C, and D are all going to happen. And there were only 4 disconnected events, so those got broken up where one line in his database became 4 separate lines. At the time spent scoring these predictions was, I did a back of the envelope calculation, something like 1,000 person hours, a huge amount of time. And this is a screenshot of just one of the days. We met every week, and we had a core group of people with other people coming in and out. Richard Saunders is in the upper center row there. So the categories we were allowed to put each of the predictions in were as follows. It was either plainly correct, it was plainly wrong, or there are a little bit of more troublesome categories. It was unknown, it was something that was expected, or it was too vague. So I'm going to be talking about what those other categories mean besides correct and wrong. So I'll cut right to the chase here because this is important. The data showed that these people were unexpectedly good at predicting future events, and the vast majority of all their predictions were absolutely demonstrably correct. They avoided making predictions that were expected, too vague, unfalsifiable, and important events which would become historic were always predicted in advance. No big events were missed. And so the evidence demonstrates that they're really psychic. And this got a little bit of a chuckle. You're all muted, so I hope you're laughing. But yeah, that's not the actual results. Yeah, it was nice to hear the people laughing at that at SciCon. So before I give you the actual results, let's talk about the categories that are more than just correct or wrong. So there was a good deal of them that were unknown. Not a huge amount, actually, but some. These were predictions that were made that were impractical or really impossible to verify. They were about spiritual things happening to people. Sometimes it was, it was predicted for most of these predictions that I'm going to tell you about today, by the way, were done so that these are the predictions made in December for the next year. So there was a time frame on it. But sometimes, the psychics skirted and said, at some time this will happen. Within 10 years, or just no date at all. It's going to happen sometime. So events dated a long time in the future or with no end date, well, we don't know if that's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet, it still might. So instead of putting it wrong or right, it had to go into an unknown. Also, there were complex trends, claims, statistical predictions about the weather and finances and all sorts of things like that. We just had no way of checking it. Also, events unlikely to have been publicly acknowledged and recorded, like private things about people, famous people, but still also unknown. There were just under 80, not a large number, but there were 80 that we had to put down as unknown. Some nice examples that fit the category. Sharon Stone's financial investments will start to show good profits now. By the way, every prediction I show is going to have a little diamond in front of it, and then the name of the psychic and the year it was made for in parentheses. And Ann is not a typo. That's the name this woman goes by. But yeah, how are we going to figure out if Sharon Stone's financial investments 20 years ago did well? Calling her up and asking her, for the contact information for a financial advisor, not going to happen. Something about airfares before Easter, it wasn't even clear, is this only in Australia, is this in the world, and the best in 15 years, kind of a statistical thing. We really had no way of checking it. Then there's ones like this, the prime minister, I do see him making his 90s. Well, all right, he turns 90 in 2028. He may or he may not, but he's still alive, so we don't know. And another one kind of like that about Sandra Bullock, that she won't remarry until she's in her 50s. So you could have rewritten that, so she will remarry in her 50s. Well, she's still in her 50s. So, we don't know if she's going to get married in her late 50s. So it's right now in the unknown category. And there's a lot of predictions because Australia is a Commonwealth country about the royal family. This is one example, and it's talking about one of them to outlive the wife and marry again, but well, maybe it'll happen, maybe not. It's 11 years since the prediction, but we don't know, so it's unknown. So another troublesome category is expected. Psychics make a large number of obvious predictions, and then they often take credit for those as being correctly predicted. The sun will come up tomorrow. I was right. Usually it's not that, that obvious, but pretty close. So these are events that were very likely or absolutely going to happen. We did not score them as correct. We didn't give that to them, even though they did happen. And this significantly reduced the percent scored correct, but we thought that was justifiable. There were almost 600 of this type in the database. That's a lot, right? Here's some examples. Many children going missing over the next 2 years. Very vague. And children always go missing. The winner of this famous horse race is going to be young or middle-aged, not old, and light brown or chestnut, as opposed to white. Probably fits 99% of racehorses who win races. Wild storms and bushfire danger. If it doesn't have a place, they mean Australia. So all the time. Large earthquakes happening in several parts of the world where they always have earthquakes. And some bank is going to experience a cyber hacking situation. Happens all the time. And wow, snowstorms in Germany. Who would have guessed? So, you know, those things happen and we didn't give them a correct on it. Then there's the other troublesome category, is too vague, right? Psychics make a large number of ambiguous predictions, and personally, they take credit for those as being correctly predicted. There were 700 nearly in this of this type. And here's some examples. So before the end of this year, so this was a prediction for 2002, we'll see a lot of underhanded things revealed in politics and business. All right, define underhanded, defined a lot of them. We probably could have put that as expected, actually. Sometimes it was hard to decide, is that expected or too vague or both? We had to pick one. Upheavals and shocks in institution and political life. George Bush and his daddy relations for them will be difficult. That was also another one that was like, well, that might have been one that was like, unknown, because it might have been kept out of the papers, but kind of said, okay, what's too difficult? It's vague. So this one was about an actress. They like to talk about celebrities a lot. Will attract a breakthrough love-wise. He's unsure whether the compatibility issue will wash. Vague, again, also perhaps unknown. A visit to the coast. Okay, which coast? By a celebrity couple. Which celebrity couple? Possibly involved with the movies. Possibly. Vague. Global charity could appeal to Nicole Kidman's soft side. The Prime Minister, extremely challenging year, especially in like half the months of the year. Hildebrand going into a spiritual year, being creative. Really weird one, unexpected objects falling to earth. I think I voted for just wrong on that one, but we went with too vague. Purple flowers from a cactus being used to prevent brain bleeding in surgery. We had arguments on these as what category. I wanted to put that as wrong because I didn't see any evidence that it happened. The entry of the planet Uranus into Aries sign will bring in new political leaders. These people love astrology. And the universe will respect money more. I can't even get through this reading it. Such a vague, ridiculous prediction. And who will win the US election? This was the 2020 election. The numerology shows that both Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden have a chance of winning the next presidential election. It's still up to the people to decide. So I want to talk about coin flip predictions. So there are a lot of predictions in the database about sports and elections where there were two people running and things like that. So these kinds of predictions were scored either correct or wrong and treated equivalently to the more unlikely predictions. This pushed the percent correct towards 50%, right? The more of those you have, the more your average is going to be 50%, just because it's random, inflating the success rate. The Dragons will make it to the finals. I don't know who those are, but it's some team. And the odds were almost 50-50 when that prediction was made. The ALF grand finale, this team to win the grand finale, and it was made on the day of the game when the odds were, in fact, 50-50. The two teams were in there. So let's go to the actual results, taking all that into account. 11% of the predictions were scored as correct. So, and that includes, as I said, giving them the correct or wrong for the coin flip predictions. Most predictions, almost 90, were unknown, not a large amount, expected, quite large amount, too vague, even more, and the largest category of all, just plain wrong, over half. For people who like it graphically, there you go. The whole right side is wrong. And if you put together the top left quadrant, expected and too vague, that's a huge number of predictions. And this is how we kept the data. Richard had originally had the columns year predicted by, where published, topic, main subject, and the prediction, and we added the verdict and any notes. And this way, the database, because it's in Excel, could be sorted by topic or main subject or the person who predicted it and the verdict. And we can look at the data a lot of ways that way. So now let's look at a number of the predictions in the largest category, which, as I said, was over 50%, just plain wrong. Over 2,000 were scored that way. So Charles and Camilla to marry in 2000, 2001, a little bit ahead of the schedule there, so no, that was wrong. Brad and Angelina, that their relationship won't last beyond another year. This was made for 2007, wrong, they went another decade. Sydney was going to be hit with a large earthquake, 2013, still hasn't happened. And Osama bin Laden is not going to be caught next year. In fact, he's not going to be caught ever. Wrong. Barack Obama is going to fall from grace, something to do with a toasted ham sandwich in a synagogue. You can't make this up, but they can. Stevie Wonder was going to die in 2019. How about, picking up the paper and reading that you're going to die in 2019 if you happen to believe in psychics? A terrorist attack in a major city predicted for 2012, because once 2001 happened, every year they were predicting this. Hillary Clinton was going to win the 2016 election. Joe Biden was going to be nominated but drop out, and Donald Trump would win the election in 2020. And most amazingly, anti-gravity to lift heavy objects will become a reality instead of a dream. That would have really helped Kenny Biddle move to his CFI office. But no, you can't go buy an anti-gravity device anywhere. Still, this was predicted for 2001. So these people were appallingly bad at predicting future events. That's the bottom line. And as Richard Saunders put it, most of what was predicted did not happen, and most of what happened was not predicted. Let's look at some subjects of interest. So a lot of predictions about the Queen in the database, Queen Elizabeth II, who Faith knows well. So a few were too vague, some were expected. And the huge majority, way more than the average, 85% were just plain wrong. In fact, there was a lot of predictions because of her advanced age during this time period that she was going to die or abdicate very soon. They predicted in 2004, 3 times in 2010, 2012, 13, 14, 18, 19, twice in 2020. And then finally, I see the Queen leaving the spotlight by May to June 2022 and retiring by 2023, 25. Almost right. No. She actually died in 2022. Not a single prediction in the database about Queen Elizabeth II was correct. Shameful. And this is how we kept the data on Queen Elizabeth. Another large category of predictions, way more interestingly than the Queen, Trump, 53 predictions made for 2004 to 2020. 11%, which is the average of the whole database, were correct. And in this case, 4 of the 5 were 50-50 odds. There was a few that were too vague, expected, right about the average number were expected, and a whopping 72% were just plain wrong. Starting with, before he was president, that an earthquake would basically shake and split one of his buildings. Then we get to the political stuff. Trump or Hillary? Hillary is clearly going to win 2016. Donald Trump will not remain in power long. It will be trumped by either Hillary or Michelle Obama. I don't know how that was supposed to happen. And then this is one of these horoscopy predictions. According to his horoscope, he's going to make a good president. His chart is starting exceptionally well on a positive note throughout 2017. Yeah. And this one by people who clearly did not know his personality. The president who lost the election and almost would not leave the White House. Donald Trump would resign out of the blue in 2019 or early 2020 for no apparent reason. And here's our Trumpy predictions. 19 were made about wars. 10%, again, close to the average, were correct. Both were arguably vague or expected, actually, but we gave them the correct on it. 10 were too vague, 37 expected, and less than half, in this case, were wrong. But we could see a lot war in the Middle East. China and the USA are going to come to blows in 2012. Chemical and biological attacks will happen around the world in 2018. North Korea will be invaded and be more peace, 2018. And a small nuclear explosion in North Korea. We all missed that in 2018. I tell you, it's like these people are just making stuff up. And unrest in Saudi Arabia, caught in the middle of a war, that would have been a couple of years ago. No. Are war entries in the database. They really like to predict natural disasters. And frankly, when I was the days I was working with the team and a natural disaster came up, I was really appreciative of it, because it's easier to prove if a natural disaster happened or didn't than, than Camilla had a bad day. It was going to have a bad day the next year, and you had to see if her horoscope was right. So there were 232 predictions about natural disasters in the database. Only 5% were correct. 8 too vague, 33 expected, and just about the average for the whole database were wrong. So some egregious examples where Australia is going to get a severe cyclone, but someone was going to divert it, so you wouldn't in Australia suffer a direct hit. These people are really bad at physics, I got to tell you. Or I don't, maybe they thought Uri Geller was going to do it. I don't know. And in fact, this was so wrong because actually a cyclone hit, causing $50 million in damage. A bad earthquake in Israel could be hit rather hard in 2001. Nope. A major catastrophe in several countries. Nothing happened that year. Volcanic eruption, Indian subcontinent, largest on record. No. And then another one of these out there predictions. Watch the media for discussions of Planet X or Nibiru approaching the solar system, having a major impact on our sun's solar flares. It doesn't work that way. That could mean more severe weather or earthquake disasters for 2011. Maybe the earthquakes if they got close enough to Earth. But no Planet X or Nibiru, sorry. Some Pacific islands will go completely underwater. Some countries are decimated. Maybe it'll happen eventually, but not in 2012. Again, Sydney being hit by a rather large earthquake for the next few years. No, we get to 2020 and it hasn't happened. Los Angeles, a huge earthquake. I mean, if that happened, we might have had to put that down to expected, but no, didn't even have one of any reasonable size, certainly not a huge earthquake. Hawaii to suffer another large volcanic eruption mid-year. There's always small ones there. There was no large one for that year. Tsunami warning, East Coast Australia following a large earthquake, didn't happen. And I don't even know what this means. 7 hills of Rome would be flattened. Large solar flare impacting the US in 3 different months and interfering with electricity supply. That might work with physics, but didn't happen. Here's another one that doesn't make any physics sense at all. Eclipses coming up, which triggers natural disasters. Only in your dreams, people. And here's our natural disasters in the database. Another category, religion. So surprisingly, only 13. Maybe Australia is not a very religious country. Like small numbers until you get to too vague, a lot of them, and then wrong right about on average. Could be a new pope in the Vatican over the next 2 years, and that was for 2002. I missed that by 3 years. Sarah Jessica Parker, connection with Tom Cruise has to do with Scientology. This wasn't obvious that this happened. Adelaide in Australia, called the city of churches, will become city of miracles. This did not happen. Sarah, Duchess of York, may turn to religion or become a hermit. Nothing in the news about that. And Tom Cruise speaking out more even than before, I suppose, in Scientology because of Leah Remini's coming out. Didn't happen that we could tell. And then a health scare for Dalai Lama. Maybe he had one and it wasn't in the news, but there was nothing in the news. And then this should have been in the news if it happened. Someone trying to assassinate the Pope. 2015, didn't happen. Our religious database. So that's the end of what we had in the database. So after we had gone through everything, we said, well, if these people are psychic, the other thing is they shouldn't have missed anything that was really big in the world. Because if you're going to predict, you can tell the moods of people, and it's going to rain a lot in Australia this year. You really should see big historic things coming up. So what we did as a team is we went through using mostly Wikipedia, because they have articles on each year in history, and said, okay, let's pick 10 things from every year in the database that was in our database starting with 2020 and find out what they didn't see coming that you'd think if they were clairvoyant, they would have. Right. And by the way, these are things that these people claim, don't claim of anything about. They forget that they miss these things when they talk about their own success rate. So starting with 2000, the famous historic presidential election where the Supreme Court decided the winner for the first time. Not predicted. Worst drought in Australia, where all these psychics are, 100 years. Not predicted. The first disaster in the shuttle program, space shuttle, space shuttle Columbia burns up on reentry. Yeah, I wonder if anybody predicted the Challenger in '86, but we didn't. That wasn't part of our look at predictions. We started in 2000, but the one that was in 2003, they did not see coming. This one was amazing for people, all these people with clairvoyant abilities to miss, right? The Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami the day after Christmas, killing 250,000 people, 14 countries, deadliest natural disaster in human history besides Noah's flood. And in 2005, coordinated suicide bombings all over London. This is like amazing that this one wasn't seen. Steve Irwin, they're always talking about celebrities. One of the most famous, well-loved personalities in Australia, dying in a freak accident. One could say they should have seen the Apple iPhone coming, bringing a revolution in smartphones. National heat wave in Australia, Michael Jackson dying an unexpected early death, another huge earthquake, actually one of the largest in history, and a tsunami in the Pacific, and the tsunami triggering the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Two biggies all at one time. Oh, and I'm not done. Sandy Hook school shootings, worst mass shooting in America, the deadliest structural failure in history in Bangladesh. Over almost 4,000 people killed or injured in one building. The freakish disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. A once in a century storm hitting Sydney. NASA finds liquid water on Mars the first time ever. And observation of gravity waves for the first time. Political again, Barack Obama visiting Cuba, first time a president is 1928. Last session of these. There are so many. The first known interstellar object detected passing through the solar system. Nobody saw it coming. France, horrible civil unrests, first since '68. Hundreds injured, arrested. Fire in Notre Dame in Paris, destroying much of the cathedral. And the big one, the COVID-19 global pandemic begins. And largely because of that, the Dow Jones Industrial Average suffers the largest point drop in history. And let me say again about Queen Elizabeth II, no one predicted the year she was going to die. Just a random meme from the internet, which holds true with me. So despite all of this, why do believers think psychics are accurate? Right? Well, the media promotes people with these claims as being the real deal. And they rarely fact check the predictions afterwards. Almost all of these are on magazines or TV shows or radio shows alike when they bring somebody in late December and say, make your predictions for next year. And they applaud them and they walk off and they never get checked. They just bring them on or another psychic on the next year. And then if you look at media, here's another reason. This is a montage from daytime television.
My next guest started communicating with the dead when she was just a toddler.
She's a wife and a mom who also happens to talk to dead people.
Please welcome celebrity pet psychic. Our next guest is a clairvoyant to the stars.
We're back with a group of friends who share a very unique bond. They are all psychic.
And yay, that's Dr. Oz, who is not going to be the senator from my neighboring state, Pennsylvania. So yeah, if you noticed, they didn't say, they say they're all psychic, but they are all psychic, as if it's a fact of life and nature. And then you get this kind of stuff. Avery Cable Station seems to have its own darling, who's not only a psychic, but a medium, because, if you just predict the future, oh, so what? If you could talk to the dead, that's especially interesting. So you get Teresa Caputo, you get Tyler Henry on the E! Entertainment Network, you get Thomas John, who's had 2 television shows on 2 different networks. And of course, it's just all over the place. You know, these are in storefronts. This is just samples of CDs, of books, whatever, magazines. Like, why wouldn't you believe it? It's all over the place. I was driving to a restaurant. I had to stop to take this picture of the sign. So this is a high school, not too far from my house, where, yeah, I just love the idea that, you know, they're showing high school students that psychics are real because they're going to raise money for the school by having them all over for a psychic fair. This is a place that is in Sarasota, Florida. Awful graphic design, I have to say. But they're a big deal because they have as their facilitators people like Eben Alexander and Raymond Moody. One is a neuroscientist who had his own near-death experience and now promotes it as being proof of the afterlife, written books and that sort of thing. Raymond Moody is the scientist who came up with the term near-death experience. So this Spirit University, not only can you go and pay for sessions with all of these people, but most of them will also teach you to be a psychic or a medium or a Reiki healer and things like that. So that's one whole thing. The media promotes these people. Then the second thing is psychics ignore their own wrong predictions, and they go to great lengths to make the track records look better than it is, right? They make many predictions for expected events, as you saw. They count those as correct, obfuscating the fact that they don't get a lot correct. They take credit for vague predictions, which further increases the perception of their accuracy. They ignore the unmade predictions, missing the big things they should have seen coming. And perhaps most egregiously, they count wrong predictions as correct on their own websites and social media. Yes, that's what I said. They count the wrong predictions as correct. And I'm going to give you some evidence of that. Kerry Culkin's an Australian psychic. A lot of her predictions are in a database. This is her own website. Every year she predicts her prediction. She posts her predictions and she checks off the one she thinks she got right with a little check mark. So here's a page from 2001. I don't want you to read all of those, but most of them we put down as vague or expected. But look at this one. Again, she's marking this as correct from 2001. May soon be able to get free energy from empty space by harnessing the magnetic field. And she's the one who made that ridiculous claim that using anti-gravity to lift heavy objects will become a reality instead of a dream. She says she got that right. So why does this matter? Well, this is a survey from Pew from 4 years ago or so, surveying people regarding their religion and what they believe about various subjects in paranormal and that all those realms. This is the one column I wanted to concentrate on here, belief in psychics. So it's an average of less than 10%, lower than half of the population. And if you look at the religious breakdown, if you're a Catholic, you're 46%, the most of all that group. But if you're nothing in particular, so if you're quote unquote spiritual, you look at the bottom, you're 52%. That back. I mean, more than half of people who say they're nothing in particular and religious wise, more than half of them believe in psychics. And what does that translate to? Well, this is an old data from way back in 2015 to 17, taken by the American Federation of Certified Psychics and Mediums of their members. By the way, if they're certified, they're real. So they say $2 billion. And this is just, I would say, what's reported to them by their members. And I would say if they get paid cash under the table, why would the people be reporting it? So this is probably really, the 2.1 billion is a tip of the iceberg about what they really make. But the Federation ranks the people and says, okay, you're either average or reasonable or you're very successful. And those are the salaries those people pull in. So I don't want anybody watching this now or in the future to please don't take this as career advice. Please don't. It's disturbing. The American Federation of Certified Psychics and Mediums themselves admits to that their members have scammed people out of $200 million. And I would say all of it's a scam, but they're not meaning that. They're meaning people who really aren't psychic, but say they're psychic. So that's what they're counting as a scam. This is an interesting chart, and it shows the gender divergence between men and women. It's a little disturbing. So the first row, if you're willing to spend more than $1,000 a year on psychics, it's a 6-to-1 gender ratio, women to men. But some people spend way more than that. If you go to the last one, $10,000 a year, it's almost 1,000-to-1 ratio. Being a guy, I'm not going to say anything about why I think that is, but it's the data. And that's just a fact. So part of the problem with this is that once people believe in this stuff, and you see they do believe it in large numbers, helped by these predictions in newspapers and magazines and all over, and never double checked, and they're all over TV and that kind of stuff, then you're much more likely to go to a psychic yourself. And since some number of psychics are just total con artists, they will take you for your life savings. I give another talk about this, which is, belief in psychics, what's the harm and who's to blame, which was based upon this article. So you can Google that article online and get the gist of it. And the problem is people lose up to their life savings because they believe in psychics, and then they get taken advantage of. So one of the things we did after we had all the data is we wanted to publicize this so it just didn't go into a drawer somewhere, right? And actually, while we were still working on it in March 2021, we worked through the end of the year in 2021. Adrian Hill published a progress report in The Skeptic to say what was going on, what this project was, and how we were proceeding so far. And then later that year, Richard Saunders gave a progress report for the Bay Area Skeptics and the Australian Skeptics at their national convention, talked about the project. And when it was all said and done, he published the final report in the Australian magazine, The Skeptic. He had at least one follow-up report that I saw about the things they didn't see coming, like is the items I told you about today that were so egregiously missed. I published 2 reports myself about this, one in my online column and one made it to the print journal. And I was happy when one of those was translated into Spanish and put in a Spanish print journal. So following the report's publication, Saunders, as well as Tim Mendham, the executive officer of Australian Skeptics, they were invited on numerous Australian media, radio, print, TV, that kind of show regarding the results, and were interviewed about it. It was a topic of the March 2022 episode of the Thinking Atheist podcast with Saunders and myself interviewed by Seth Andrews. And since he's just got such a soothing voice, I'm going to play the intro for that.
Okay, today we're going to talk about the ratios and predictive success of psychics. 2 very special guests today. I'll let them talk more about what they do, but just some quick background. Rob Palmer has a background in engineering, and he's done some impressive sounding work: spacecraft designer, aerospace project engineer, computer programmer. And he was once a believer in extraordinary claims before he began to pursue a more critical path. You can find his Facebook page for The Well-Known Skeptic. That's easily searchable. He writes for Skeptical Inquirer and more. And then Richard Saunders is an Australian skeptic, podcaster, and debunker. He has served as past president for the Australian Skeptics. He hosts the Skeptic Zone podcast. Both of these guys were involved in a project called the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project. What happens when you actually track psychic predictions to determine accuracy, reliability, etc.? What happens when you take a scientific lens to these supernatural claims? How refreshing. So today we're talking about this very thing. And a huge welcome to Rob Palmer and Richard Saunders. Thanks for coming to talk about the project.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So I was really pleased about that. It was kind of a coup because, it's outside the choir. And we always talk as skeptics about, we're always preaching to the choir, write articles that are only read by other skeptics. And this is like a sort of a somewhat connected audience of atheists and agnostics and humanists, but not a full overlap. So and he has a very large following. So I was really glad when Seth reached out to CFI and, tried to get contact information for me to come and talk about this. So let me give you some closing thoughts. So this isn't directly part of the project, but this is my own opinion here after having worked on it. Basically, the appalling record uncovered by our analysis of this huge set of predictions, combined with the failure to predict the over 200 items of the time period of the study that they should have seen coming, should be embarrassing to people claiming clairvoyance. It's almost like none of these people, and perhaps no one, is actually psychic. So I'll say one more thing about that. As a card-carrying skeptic, I need to say, well, maybe someone's actually psychic out there. We didn't have their data in the database. Maybe they're not in Australia. But the fact is, no one has ever proved they can do this. And this is one of these burden of proof things, right? You need to prove an extraordinary claim. Psychic, mediumship, paranormal claims have been investigated and never been found to be authentic by unbiased researchers. And I'm not talking about paranormal enthusiasts because they want to believe it. I'm talking about Harry Houdini, James Randi, Susan Gerbic. Besides the $1 million paranormal challenge, which was active for a long time by the JREF, James Randi Educational Foundation, which that is now defunct. There are 25 other prizes to be won over the world, totaling $1 million, and none of them have ever been won. The Center for Inquiry's investigation group currently has the largest one, $250,000. And if someone knows someone out there who's a psychic and they win the prize, you get a $5,000 referral fee. You can see this list that I mentioned of all the ones in the world in the Wikipedia article named a list of prizes of evidence for paranormal, just like it says there. And this is CFI's page. It's very easy to find. You can Google it and you just click apply online, and you'd think it would be easy if you got psychic powers or any other paranormal powers. So let me let Richard Saunders, since this is his project, have the last word. This is a little excerpt from his speech to the Bay Area skeptics about, how could you be a good psychic?
What we've discovered in many, many hours of pouring through these predictions, if you want to be a successful psychic in the prediction game, make many predictions. Make as many as you possibly can churn out and keep most of them vague and ethereal. And then sprinkle those with some very precise predictions. And when occasionally your very precise predictions come true, which they must if you make a lot of them, if you make a lot of predictions in general, then that's the ones you point out and you say, I predicted this would happen. And all the other ones are forgotten, especially by the media, because the story is this psychic got it right. That's all they're interested in.
So, yeah, that's the bottom line. And Richard ended his article, so I'm going to end my talk with this. This was from the credits taken from the report he put in the Skeptic, and it was thanking many of the people who worked over the decades on this project. So thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob, for that. So we have one question in the chat. This is from Kenny Biddle. Have any psychics responded to this publishing? If so, what type of response was received?
Wow, I wish that had happened, Kenny. Not to my knowledge. Richard has never mentioned it. So since he hasn't, we're in a constant chat with him. We actually have a little Facebook group of many of the people who worked on this project over the years that still talk about this sort of thing, and it's never come up. So I presume not.
Okay. And looks like Eric has his hand up. And you're allowed to unmute now.
Right. First, Rob, thanks very much. There's nothing like data. A couple of, if I may, minor quibbles. If one is, in terms of the gender ratio of looking at money spent, I wonder if that's a major confound there, is that women tend to outlive men. So I imagine that there are more widows and widowers. And I also imagine that there's a strong desire in that group to reconnect with the dead. So that might be part of the explanation. I'd be curious if they broke that.
Yeah, I don't know if I call that a quibble. You're giving some explanations. That's reasonable. I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons for it. That certainly could be part of it.
Yeah, I just wanted just to kind of what's the word? Well, yeah, just something.
Yeah, I mean, I've pointed out before when I've given this talk other places, somebody might have said, "Oh, yeah, it shows women are much more, gullible than men." I go,
No.
well, if you go to Bigfoot conferences or UFO conferences, or no, there's mostly men there. So like, it's just there's different interests in the genders for some reason. And maybe this applies more. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. Women are on average maybe more emotional. Men hide their emotions, and psychics play on emotions. Possibly that's one of the contributing factors. Well, one interesting thing I find is most of the famous psychics, especially psychic mediums, are men, but most of the street level neighborhood people are I never see a guy. Whenever I see one of them arrested, or it's always women. That's an interesting thing. So that could be, now it's a woman to woman thing, whereas like, maybe, I see Madame Maria is there. Maybe a woman is more likely to go in than a guy. Maybe. I don't know if they've ever done surveys on that kind of thing.
And what last question is, what did the psychic group count as scam?
Yeah, I don't know. But well, I'll tell you, my other talk involves all about scams. It's all about scam. It's these people who profess to have clairvoyance and or some other psychic ability, and they rope these people in, and they take them for all they can get, sometimes literally up to their life savings, which literally is sometimes millions of dollars in some people's cases. The big money ones make the news, and I've written a lot of articles on this subject, including the one I showed you. Also, you can go to the Wikipedia article on the detective named Bob Nygaard, Nygard, because he's one of the only people who's known for, helping victims of these kinds of scams get some justice. There's a lot of cases listed there, of the more fabulous ones. If someone takes $5,000 from you, it's not going to make the news. If they take $1 million from you, and also if you're a CEO of a company, that might make the news. And those are the kind of reports that make the news, and therefore that's what's reported on Bob Nygaard's page and that sort of thing. It's the more famous big money cases that happen, but they're not unusual. They're not rare at all. So I don't know if that's, to get back to your question, I'm not sure if some of those people were in the Federation and then they found out about it and they listed that. That could be possibly. And of course, we don't know how many people who have street neighborhood psychic shops are like that. Who's gonna, I don't know. But the thing I know about it is that Bob Nygaard gets more calls from victims than he can handle ever. And there's no agency that handles this. He's a specialist in doing this, and he has to turn people away all the time. He gets 5 or 6 calls a day, and he's as busy as he possibly can be about people who've been ripped off for their life savings, huge amounts of money. And it's a horrible thing, and it all comes from people believing in this nonsense. And I do blame the mass media and anyone else who just, hey, let's have a psychic on. It's fun. Hello, Mr. Biddle.
Hey, what's up, Rob?
Long time no see.
I know. I mean, I haven't seen you in what, like a day?
A day.
I do have a comment to feedback on, I think, Eric, what he mentioned about the ratio for male to female.
Please.
And I mean,
Kenny's actually gone to sittings. Kenny has investigated directly. So Kenny could talk to this better than I can.
I've been to Lilydale. I've been to a bunch of psychic fairs, and it is dominated by female. And there is no age range that I can really look at. It's all over the board. And most of the people that I see there are probably around my age or younger that go to the psychic fairs.
So that's like 25 or so, Kenny?
Like 17. What do you? I just look older.
It's the beard. It's the beard.
So I'm 50, and most of the people that I do associate with when I'm there, when I go around and interview, because I talk to not only the psychics and mediums that are selling their quote unquote services, But I also talk to participants and interview them, incognito. I don't let them know that I'm the token skeptic, because that would be bad. But I go through and talk to them and find out, most of them are just trying to talk to deceased family members, not necessarily a husband or a wife. It's always like mom or dad, brother, sister, or children. Children are probably highest, because, and it's sad. It's very sad. I don't want to sound like I'm mean to anyone that does it, but it's difficult because those are the people that ask your opinion, and I feel bad telling them, but I mean, I do anyway because they asked. But I mean, yeah, just from observations like that, it is dominated by females. And even going to Lilydale, I went to Lilydale, and
what's Kenny? What's Lilydale? I have not heard of that.
Lilydale is a spiritualist community. It's about an hour away from me now, which is great because I'm going to visit there again.
A lot of trips.
Yeah, but when I only went once, and it was a spring day, and I counted 2 other guys. That's it, through the whole community. We saw a couple hundred people easily, and there were only 2 other guys there, and one of them was with us. So there's one other guy there that I did not know, and it became a joke slash a scavenger hunt to try to find somebody else, a male, and we couldn't do it. So I mean, I don't know. That's observation. It's definitely not hard data, but I just wanted to throw that in there too, in the mix.
Yeah, I've heard reports back from, let's say, I think one was on Squaring the Strange podcast, if I remember right. Maybe it was Ben and Celestia went to several of these kinds of things. Might even been John Edwards, and they talked about huge amphitheater, and like the only men there, they said, looked like they were just dragged there by their girlfriends or wives. Yeah.
I went to I forget his name now. I wrote up it's one of the sting operation that I was working with Susan on. Fraser.
Matt Fraser.
Yeah. The audience there as well was dominated by females. There were a few males there, more than Lilydale, but it was still dominated. I mean, rows and rows of females. And then once in a while you'd see the husband or something interspersed in the row, but it was definitely a female dominated.
Could you tell if there was a difference in the VIP seats of people who are willing to pay, a lot more money?
There were none. This was a general admission.
Oh, okay.
There were no V. You basically paid your ticket. You walked in, you sat wherever there was an empty seat. So that's all I got.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've been to general fringe groups with, clubs that are into all of these sorts of things. And it was 50-50, but it wasn't just, they were talking about conspiracy theories and UFOs and everything you could think of. And
Right.
It was a pretty much mixed bag. So the age thing is an interesting question that Eric brought up. I'm noticing, and again, well, this would definitely skew because of the technology, but, flipping around on TikTok, whenever you come across somebody claiming to be a psychic or an astrologer or whatever, it's a woman, and generally a young person. Yeah,
I think a lot more younger people. Now I'm going to sound old. A lot of youngsters, they're cashing in, and TikTok is a great platform for them because they can do live readings live, and just talk a lot of shit, and people send them money. I mean, you get little gifts, and you can just sit there and read, and you can cold read for hours, and it doesn't matter what you say. I mean, if you got some skills, at just guessing, I mean, general statements like that, you can throw out some general statements and get someone hooked. And you see in the comments, people will react and tell you, oh yeah, you're right. And they'll tell you a story, and give you more details, which you can also rehash back to them.
So in that regard, when people get that confirmation that they're doing a good job, that even maybe if you're not a con artist and you kind of have an inkling you're intuitive, and then you see all that, you know, confirmation that you're doing it right, that pushes more in your own mind that you actually have these powers, right?
Yeah, that reaffirms in your head that you have this. It's conditioning, because most of the people that I've interviewed that claim to be psychic or mediums or both, because that seems to be once you're one and your revenue starts slowing down, you become the other. So you have to keep it going. But I find that they had started out with family and friends, so they did little readings for their family, and their family would tell them, "Oh, you know, I think you have a gift," especially when we're talking about a family that already believes. So they reaffirm that, and then they go to their friends who are also believers, and they do short readings on them, and they get that reassurance back, and it builds that confidence and convinces them that they have some kind of special ability. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with somebody like that, very polite conversation, and allowed them to try to read me and tell them honestly, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. And then after 10, 15 minutes, switch to a serious conversation and just say, do you think it's possible that you don't have this power, and that maybe just your friends were being nice and your family were just being nice to you because, you know, you've gotten everything wrong that you've said about me? And you can see the cognitive dissonance going on. You can see that the hamster wheel is spinning, and then it locks up because they don't know what's going on. And usually they say something like they want to think about it. Maybe you're right, I don't know. And then literally the next day they're right back at it. So it's sad.
What do you make of the people like, okay, so this is beyond cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. What do you make of the people who, as I showed an example of Kerry Culkin's on her own website, saying all these predictions are right, which are clearly bizarre and didn't happen? You know, free energy devices are going to be freely available. Like what? And then she marks that correct. Like what?
Good marketing.
Yeah, there you go. It's marketing. And you know why? There's an easy out. The government has it. They just don't want you to have it.
There you go.
So there you go. There is free.
I don't know. It said freely available, though. I don't know.
Freely available to government employees without secret clearance.
The NSA people, yeah.
Or you blame your IT guy for the check mark.
There you go.
So actually, I'm sorry, Michael, you've been asked something?
No.
No, okay. So you just occurred to me another, what's the word, confound? I don't know what the right word is that I make up in my mind that, at least in my experience, I think women tend to be more perceptive about other people's reactions or what they're feeling, you know, I mean, and this sort of thing. So I make it in my mind that fairly early on, it might be that a young girl is more likely to see how she sees things other people aren't seeing. That's real, you know, like, are you having a bad day? Gee, what happened? You know, what's going on? You know, was it your mom? And I mean, sincerely being a sensitive human being. And then that, because they've had that experience of feeling intuitive themselves, they're more likely to think that it can be larger than that in other people. And that might be a reason that women are more willing to be open to the possibility that someone else has powers beyond their own, and therefore spend more money there. And I don't mean this in a dismissive way at all.
I understand. And I have another observation I just thought about that too. So I was thinking of all of the victims that I know about that have made big newspaper headlines that I added to Wikipedia article on, you know, pages on the subject. They're all women. It's like, you know, all the people, well, not all, I won't say all. One person I remember distinctly was a guy, but he actually, even in the article, said he had, problems, mental problems. But the huge majority of the women who are taken for huge sums by the con artists, that end of it, at least the ones all that make into the newspapers are all women. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, the one guy that I remember is because he went to the psychic because he was in love with a woman. I don't remember his name, but it was the woman he was in love with. I remember for some reason was Michelle. And he was trying to find out from the psychic if he had any bad vibes about him, why Michelle wasn't paying him any attention on Facebook. He wanted it to be more than a Facebook friend, right? And oh yeah, definitely. You have curse on you. I see bad, auras around you, whatever. I have to go take special courses. It's going to be a lot of money for me to figure out how to clean you, but I'll do it. Work with me. Years went on, taking thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands. And, he would test it out by going online, and Michelle would be a little nicer one day. And so he would think it was confirmation bias. Sometimes he would think it was working. So he kept paying money, right? And he was in for hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't remember the exact number, and then Michelle died. So the object of his attention died. So he goes back to the psychic. Maybe it was going to be one last time. Oh, I'm sorry. I knew you were trying your best. I'm not going to ask for my money back. It's not your fault he died. Oh, don't worry. It's not over yet. I can find another vessel to put her spirit into so you can still date her. And he kept going at it for years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh. That's definitely like that's playing on someone's emotions and exploiting the hell out of them.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And then religion comes into play. And I talk more about this when I've given the harm and talking and like for recovering from religion, because that's a big deal in it. Bob Nygaard, said, it's interesting. I've never had an atheist client. I'm not saying an atheist couldn't fall for this, but I've never had one who was. And that's interesting because, and we talk about it, if you're raised in a religion and you're raised to believe in a being reading your mind and, there's an afterlife and whatever, it's just a tiny step to a person can facilitate that, right? So therefore, if you're a religious person, you're much more likely to become a victim of one of these people. And sometimes, maybe even often, the con artists use religion. So they use these magic tricks, which they then make it biblical, and it's called gospel magic, and it proves they have powers, and they'll do things that prove that they have powers from God to the people. And then they'll use religious imagery and talk. And there was one case, I don't remember if it was Nygaard's or he just told me about it with someone else's, but it was a woman who had she lost a baby early in her pregnancy. And then years later was pregnant again and went to the psychic to see what was going to happen. Am I going to have this baby? Is it going to be okay? And of course, you got bad vibes around you. I don't think so, unless we do something. And, she worked with her and worked with her and worked with her. And then she wouldn't even let it go with that. Then she said, the baby you lost is burning in some kind of a purgatory thing. And I'm connected with the soul. And I can get them out of there if I go take special lessons in Africa, and you're going to pay for me to do that. Yeah, so that's what happens to it.
But I'd like to add, as a female, we have a general easier time of being able to express our emotions. So a lot of times when people do seek out psychics or, they want to know their future, it's involving marriage, love, children, and even if it's dealing with death, a lot of men aren't going to want to go talk to somebody that wants to connect with a dead relative generally, because it's just those are things you don't do. And I actually paid for a psychic street reading when I was in college in New Orleans, and it was one of these things. One of my girlfriends was like, why don't we sit down and just do like a little quick reading? And the only thing that popped out of this woman's mouth was, we sat down, paid her like $5, and she was going to do a quick reading about my love life. And all she said was that I see a dark man. And that was enough to have me and my friend go, oh my God, she got a dang, oh my God, I want to get. But, I don't remember anything else this woman said, but she obviously was wrong, because I did not end up marrying that person. We broke up, but it was one of those things where you seek out that type of attention. Like I ran across the people on TikTok, and what is so interesting is that they use dowsing rods. So whenever the dowsing rods cross, that's when the spirits will tell you yes. And if you've ever watched a live stream on TikTok, the chat is going so fast, you have no idea what people are commenting. You can't really scroll to look back. And so all this person is doing is like saying, hi, Karen, you wanting to know about if this grandbaby you're going to have is going to be a girl. And the dowsing rods will cross and they say the spirits say yes. So they just churn this stuff out and people are giving awards and it's like a slot machine with all the things that are going.
So it just occurred to me that, you know, one of the best tools for teaching skepticism about psychics would be to have people, and I think, Kenny, you do this, teach people cold reading, you know, or you know, sit behind someone and tell them, you know, through a microphone or something like that, did you notice that he did this? That means, and so people can actually see how easy it is to intentionally cold read someone. And I think that, you know, just a thought, it'd be like have a booth, like become a cold reader, you know, and and you would bring in people from both sides, you know, people who have a predisposition to think it's not true and a predisposition to think it is. And, you know, there's nothing like, quote unquote, seeing it for yourself.
I'd be afraid you'd be teaching people a life skill that some percent of them will then therefore go use, which they might not.
Well, or they could even use it to better their relationships.
That's the villain's origin story right there.
Right. So one of the skeptic who is thinking his power is her website, and she was a Sunday speaker, is Melanie Tracy King. Actually is a teacher, and she teaches a course in teaching her students, you know, the proper way to understand science. And she doesn't just teach facts, she teaches, you know, this is how you make, you know, bad data, this is how you fool people, and this is whatever. So it's like, actually, I wonder if that's going to turn out badly for any of them. It's like they're going to all become the con artists because you're teaching them what these people do. But of course, the intent is by teaching them what people do, you're not going to fall victim to it. Yeah. Yes, is exactly right.
I think you're right, Eric, about teaching about cold reading, but I think we need to hit people when they're young. Yes. I recently, last week, I don't know, my weeks have been blurred together. But last week I spoke to a 7th grade class in Florida, and we talked about psychic readings and how they do it. We talked about cold reading, we talked about hot reading, and the kids were really interested. And one of the questions, well, I had 2 funny questions. One was, what I do like being a stalker, which I loved, because it's pretty much, I said, yeah, kinda, but not in, I'm a good guy that's making the bad people stop. So my stalking stops once the information has been brought to light. Then I stop. I don't continue afterwards, and it's not personal, it's business. And the second question was from a young man that he said, well, I'm very young, and you're talking about hot reading, which is finding out information about people. Could you find me? And I was like, that's a good question. And we went through the steps. I said, there's websites you can go to, like, are you on social media? And he said, yes. I said, all right, well, your name is already up on the screen because it's a Zoom call. I already know your name. I know what school you're going to. I know your teacher. There's websites out there where you can subscribe to look at yearbooks. Have you had your picture taken and put in a yearbook? And he's like, yeah. I said, well, I can find you probably within an hour. And I want you to, if that scares you, you should be, because I want you to understand all this stuff that you're putting on social media. That was just with a little bit of information. But if you post where you are and what friends you're with, what you're doing all the time, if somebody wants to get to you, they can. And this is something all of you need to know. So it was really good to turn that talk about psychics and investigating people into a life safety lesson for these kids, because now they understood. And I got feedback from the teacher 2 days later saying that the kids just absolutely loved it. She loved it. She wants to have more of these sessions. So I think this is really something that we should push, even for skeptic groups and humanist groups or whatever, to push this kind of thing, to try to work with teachers and get into the classrooms and teach something about critical thinking and how to think. I mean, it's so important, and we can stop this kind of stuff that Rob's been talking about, like this $1 million or $1 billion, is it $1 billion industry?
Oh, well, in 2015 to 17, I think the data was, the admitted, credit card charges for the legal stuff, not talking about total ripoffs as like,
Right.
was 2 billion with a B.
Damn.
In America, and that's just the United States. Clearly, this goes on all over the world.
Just in America. Yeah, that's huge. And I mean, you got to consider some of the stories that he's told, and with Bob Nygaard and stuff. Lives are ruined because of this. It's an addiction.
I mean, he's had people, on a ledge on a building call him, about I'm going to jump. I want you to hear the story so you can like go try to prosecute the psychic, but my life is over because
I mean, if we can keep pushing and get to people early, get to kids, and teach them, show them, give them these examples. And show
what you did when we Kenny and I did a joint presentation on slightly connected topics about psychics in a skeptics group in North Jersey, and Kenny started with a reading of the people. I was shocked because he didn't tell me he was going to do it. He did it great. It was a hot reading, right, Kenny?
Yeah. I did a reading on them. You did information about the industry, and then I think I took over and talked about some of the things I've done, some of the investigations I've done, and stopped right in the middle and just started reading people. And there were 3 or 4 people that I read, and I was doing the whole thing. I mean, thanks to Mark Edward for teaching me the whole the drama and all that goes along with it. And I was like, I'm getting these visions, and I feel there's somebody that was a cook. I see this big pot, and it's on a military ship or something like that. And I feel it over here, and I point to the guy, and he's like, I was a cook. I was a cook in the Army or the Navy. And I started talking about people's children and their names, their ages, and all of this. And they're amazed. And finally, I was like, you want to know how I did it? And I held up a piece of paper, and I said, I printed out your profiles on your website. And I had everything highlighted. I was reading off a paper of information you people put online about this group that we're talking to about psychics. So there you go. And you all believed me.
And this was a group of, they weren't skeptics. As I said, there's an overlap that there were humanists, right? It was a humanist group.
Yeah.
But you go to a group that's totally not into any kind of skepticism of anything. And it's like, and the common thing we always hear at Kenny is there's no way they could have known, right? The only logical explanation is they're psychic mediums, right? As opposed, so that would be a great thing to teach children right up front, the fact, the cold reading and hot reading, that this is done all over the place, and don't fall for it. Yeah.
Right.
It's Susan's done this with a lot of people. She's, had people who've been victims of famous TV mediums and talked to them, and they contact, well, you're wrong. The person's real. There's no way they could have known that. And within 5 minutes, she can tell them everything that, they reported, because she can find it online too.
There's so many ways to find information. And sometimes there's quick ways, within seconds, within minutes, you can find information. Sometimes it takes a while. I mean, if you have enough time, if I have a day, there was a psychic that I investigated earlier this year that made this claim that he talked to some kind of angels or a demon. He was talking to a demon, of all things, and the demon told him that he was adopted. And this psychic retold this story on a podcast, saying that there's no way anyone would know because it's not anywhere. It's not recorded anywhere. And he gave a date for like a year where this event happened. So I went to his Facebook page, and I scrolled and 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 scrolled until I got to that year. And it took me quite a long time to get to it. And there it is, one post that said he was adopted. He was celebrating National Adoption Day. And thank you to my adoptive parents, and this and that, and big banners and stuff like that. So yeah, if you're willing, if you have enough time, I can find almost anything about you. And it's you don't think you can, because maybe you don't have subscriptions or you're not aware of some websites, but like I have background checkers that I subscribe to. And I mean, I dig, and within an hour, I have your finances, employment history, resident history, family members. I can track down obituaries and find out all your extended family. And telephone numbers, emails. I can find all this and go through your social medias and just find pictures from vacations and deceased loved ones, funerals you went to, pets that died. You know, there's so much out there, and you give me 24 hours, I will tell you your life story. And just thank goodness that I'm a good guy and I'm not using my powers for evil.
Don't go to the dark side.
Well, that was really good marketing, Kenny.
Thank you. I get on a roll sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean, and the other thing that
you just
comes
scared
with-
the crap out of me. Actually, I'm going to go start deleting everything.
Too late. Can't get rid of it once it's on the internet. There's mirror images all over the place. So the other thing that comes into play a lot is I've given talks on critical thinking, and the first third of it about is how bad our memories and our perception of the real world is, and our brain's processing powers, and you don't know that, right? So like, as I say, and there's two famous lines, both of which are very wrong, but people think they're, just statements of truth. I know what I saw and I know what I remember. And no. So you come from a reading, you talk about, oh, I had this reading. I've had a friend tell me 10 years ago, she had a reading and she's repeating what happened. I can guarantee you, I can't prove it because you don't have a recording, but everything you're telling me is not what happened in that room. But it's her brain reconstructing it over and over and over and over again. And now she sees that as just as real as she was in the room when it happened to her. And she would not believe me that there was a problem with that. And she went to John Edward, by the way, and he named her, not even dead, by the way, but former husband, and there's no way he could have known that. And, I cannot convince her she's wrong, right? All right. Are you, say it was Bart, I don't remember the name, but are you sure he didn't say Bill or Brad or Bart? Oh yeah, it's Bart. No, he just said Bart. Well, you don't really know that, right? And then I sent her proof of how that particular mistake is made by people who shouldn't have made that mistake. There's a podcast, Oh No, Ross and Carrie, which I had recently listened to, where, if you don't know it, Ross and Carrie go and they do things so you don't have to do them. And one of them was they went to a psychic medium. And Ross and Carrie both are on the podcast giving their notes of what happened in this reading of this medium. And Ross said something like, oh, she came over to me and she knew my grandmother's name was Samantha, and I was shocked. And Carrie's looking at her notes. No, Ross. She said, I wrote it down. Is it Sherry, Samantha, Susan, or Samantha? And he had oh my God, I didn't remember that. And this is somebody who does this for a living. He runs the CSI challenge. I mean, if anyone would have absolutely not made a mistake about this, it was him. And he made a mistake about that. He thought he remembered it properly, and she said just the right name. And the only way we know it was not true was that Carrie had the note she wrote about all the other names that the woman said.
Yeah,
So
there was a great.
what's the chances that my friend remembered from 10 years correctly that it was only Bart that was said? Like zero.
Yeah. There was a great paper, I can't remember where it was published, interviewing people about the Challenger disaster. And I think it was 5 years, 10 years afterwards.
Yeah.
Kenny, you're nodding. And
I remember, yeah.
This was random people. And I think the questions were, where were you? Yeah. With whom were you, if that was a sentence, and by what medium had you learned, meaning news medium, not psychic medium, had you learned about the disaster? And the overall correspondence that they could track down was really poor. And this wasn't even about some psychic thing. This was just an incredibly shocking life event. And it just, I think that paper, blows out of the water anybody's conception that their memories, that I know I remember it well. Well, maybe not.
Yeah, I remember reading that. And
I've used the invisible gorilla video
several
times.
That's I know what I saw. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you think, because you've seen it so many times, you're thinking like, I'm gonna play this, no one's gonna get it. No one's gonna do what they're supposed to do and not see the gorilla. They're all gonna see it. And then I play it, no one sees it. And they swear, like, you get into fights because they're like, no, you played a separate video. No, no, I didn't.
So in
just
my
didn't pay
critical
attention.
thinking presentation, Kenny, I play that video, and it's an
Oh, yeah.
updated version of it where there's another change. So everyone might have heard, or a lot of people might have heard it. So I said, did you see the gorilla? Oh, yeah, I saw it. Did you see the color background, which they never took the camera off, change from red to green? No. And then you play it back and you see it clearly does that.
Yeah.
So it's like, because
Awesome.
now they're looking for the gorilla, because they know there's going to be a gorilla, just out of, from history of seeing this. But this was done differently, and they didn't see the background color change.
Right.
Yeah, and another just quick plug too, and again, I don't mean to be taking up everyone's time, but in our local group, we do a yearly presentation about visual illusions, and which are great because you can put your finger on the thing and say, I know you think this line is curved, and then it is not curved, and just like people's minds are blown. Or I know you see black dots at the intersections, but there are no black dots at the end. I think you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I actually included 3 different types of those in my critical thinking one. That was another thing that, the world is not what the actual world is not what your brain is perceiving. Yeah.
Yeah. I always title that, you can't believe everything you see.
Yeah. I also play the Yanni Laurel thing, because a lot of people didn't really remember that one. And then I showed the dress thing.
Yeah. The dress thing is cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I was curious, what was one prediction that you guys thought was, oh, this is very unlikely for somebody who got it correct, but they got it correct?
Yeah, that's interesting. That was asked at like, I remember Richard being asked that at the Bay Area Skeptics, and he knows all the details of the 3,800 whatever predictions more than I do, and he said not really one. And yeah, I don't remember in any session where we said, wow, how'd they get that right? It just not. The things that they predict, okay, there's going to be the natural disasters. There were some percent right, because as Richard said, if you make a lot of guesses about this, something's going to happen. There's going to be an earthquake somewhere in Europe. Okay, yeah, there was that year. It's somewhere, it's kind of vague, but there was one, so we gave them the correct. But even that wasn't. No one said, oh, it's going to be in Paris and it's going to destroy this building. Like there was the one that's going to destroy Trump Tower or something in Manhattan. No, it doesn't happen. But if there happened to be one in Manhattan that did that, wow, would she pay that? Go to the bank with that? Because you make enough predictions and something is going to be amazingly right. And yeah, interestingly, nothing rings a bell as, wow, that was absolutely amazing. It just wasn't.
Cool.
I mean, some people might say, well, maybe just all the Australian psychics are bad. It's like, which is why I kind of ended it with, anybody could apply for the Paranormal Challenge. It's easy to do. Why are these people so afraid of doing it?
I constantly pimp that out because, hey, I'm in it for the $5,000.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I want my $5,000. So anytime somebody comes up and gives me shit for something, I had a friend. I had a friend at work who claimed that her friend was not only psychic but a medium, and the reason was she told her what her grandmother used to cook for her, some kind of kielbasa or something, and that was enough to convince her. And we started talking and then arguing about it. Oh, science doesn't know everything. Science is, and then I brought up the challenge, and of course her answer is, her friend doesn't need to prove it to anybody. She doesn't need the money. They're good up until you have to prove it, and then it's like, well, no, I don't have to prove it. No, I don't have no. But yeah, well, you know what? My response to that, it depends on the person, because if they do it professionally and they're collecting money for their alleged service, then yes, I do respond saying, yes, you do have to prove it because you're charging money for this, and if you can't prove it, then you're committing fraud. You're stealing people's money. So yeah, you do need to prove it. And
the interesting thing, of course, is that's our opinion, but in reality, legally, they don't have to prove it.
They don't. No, because it's for entertainment.
Yeah, sure.
It's for entertainment.
I got to go, but thank you. So I'm sorry to have to cut out early, but Rob, thank you so much.
Are we
And for-
early?
and-
No, thank you, Eric.
Oh, well, you're welcome. And for taking so many questions, and you too, Kenny. Thanks a lot. Good to see you all. And
Good to see you.
and I'll be sending you my predictions psychically afterward.
You don't have to. I already have.
You already got them.
Because I also have precognition of the future. So there you go.
One question to, so I think it seems like women are more attracted to psychics or to have predictions. But what about psychics themselves? Is there more women psychics than male psychics? Is it a similar proportion as people that?
So I gave you my perception just from news stories on them, who people mostly who've been fallen into trouble with the law. Kenny, what's your perception of people that you've met in person?
I think the majority of alleged psychics, mediums, are female. We see some celebrities, John Edward, I can't even remember, Tyler Henry, Matt Fraser,
Chip
what's
Coffey.
the other? Chip Coffey.
Uri Geller, that was another big one. He keeps popping up.
I don't know. Does he call himself psychic?
Does he qualify as a psychic?
I think he's got every other power but psychic powers. Pretty much.
I don't know. I think he chalks up to a little bit of everything, but I was wondering, maybe the reason that women tend to gather more toward that end of things is maybe just simply cold hard, what exactly is the brain matter? In this case, women have more active and slightly larger amygdalas, and their VTA actually produces more of those hormones at a faster rate, so might indicate something there. I mean, I'm not going to say for sure, but that might be something.
There's a historical significance to this, because when spiritualism came up, when it began their rise to fame, it was a chance for women to step out of the role of almost like a second-class citizen and take charge. Because when you were the medium, when you were possessed or you were speaking for the spirits, you could do and say whatever you wanted, which was not something that was allowed. They could make a lot of money, which was also something that was frowned upon. So the historical significance here is that it gave freedom to women, that it gave them freedoms that they didn't normally have. So it was a good way to take charge, to get notoriety, to get fame, to get
that's
fortune.
an interesting perspective.
And I think that trickles down today. I mean, it's actually weird, because today a lot of your big names, I know more men than I do women, as in like celebrity psychics.
Yeah, I've noted that before in these discussions, and someone said something about, well, because it's men, which still in a patriarchal society still, are believed more than women. So therefore, if you're going to rise to fame, it's the ones who are the men.
But yeah, most of the psychic mediums that I come across, they're all female. Yeah. I don't, outside of a celebrity one, I haven't come across a male that has claimed to be a psychic medium that takes money. Let me put it that way. There's a few that claim to be some kind of psychic or a sensitive or an empath, because they like to make up different names for the same shit. But it's basically anyone that does it for a full-time job.
Well, how about the adjacent energy healing stuff? Because every time I meet somebody who tells me they're a Reiki master, it's a woman.
Yeah, it's mostly, it's unless you're just adding it, because I've seen some people that are just out, they're fame whores, and they will just add every title to their name. And I see a few men do that, but mostly when it comes to Reiki, it's all females. I haven't come across a guy that was doing it at any of the fairs that I've been to.
Interesting. Yeah, actually, I do know one that I'll retract that. We met somebody who's an RFR client. He calls in on the Zoom sessions. He joins us often, and he's told the story publicly where he paid a lot of money to become a Reiki master, $600-700, something like that, and then realized it was bullshit.
I can pay $50 online. Get it?
No, well, he just didn't want the certificate, Kenny. He thought it was real.
Hey,
He was
I am
training.
certified
I
as a
know.
parapsychologist.
I know.
That's what happens when you are bored on happy hour and you're like, well, I'm feeling buzzed. I might as well get a degree. And you skip the lessons and you just take the test. I passed. All right. I got to get going, guys. It was good talk. Good talk, Rob.
Thanks
Good
for
seeing you again.
chiming in, Kenny. Glad to see you here.
Anytime, man.
And I submitted your article yesterday, so we'll see where they go.
Yes, I heard. I get all the scoop now. I know when everything happens.
I should have just given it to you to give to him then.
That's all right. That's all good. All right, man. Take it easy. Goodbye, guys.
Bye. Any other questions?
For those who don't know, by the way, Kenny, I interviewed him for this reason. He just last month, right before SciCon was announced, he got a rather prestigious position, which is a first of its kind with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He is their chief investigator. He actually got a job, like they moved him up to Buffalo and he's got an office up there. He got to quit his career of doing something totally different, which he probably didn't really care about once he started doing paranormal investigations. And is it like, look, this guy, he gets paid full time to do what he loved and was doing for free anyway.
Yeah, and he used to be a ghost hunter, right? That was an interesting.
Yeah, again, that was his, his hobby. But yeah, I mean, he's worked as a mechanic, first auto mechanic, and then aerospace like mechanic, putting helicopters and stuff together, and then something in the medical industry, working on, like medical scanning devices and whatever. But it was a job that really he didn't have his heart into it. But he was, first he got into the ghost hunting as a hobby, then he became a paranormal investigator as a hobby. But now he got to quit all that and go actually be a paid paranormal investigator and chief investigator for a center for, it's amazing, CSI.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
It is amazing. I was tuned in when he, on his private YouTube stream, he has a show he does every week, the Skeptic Help Bar, and I thought they were going to talk about SciCon because it was a few weeks away, but it was about him being able to finally announce that. I've never seen somebody so happy about getting a job.
Before more people left, I should have done this earlier. We have a meeting next week on Wednesday. It's Culture Club, and I think we're reading a book. I forget the name of the book that we're reading, but Jeff asked me to ask everyone if Science on Trial, there we go. Jeff asked me to ask everyone if we want to have that, even though it's so close to Thanksgiving. I mean, I'm fine doing it, but just seeing what other people. So right now let's see, there's 7 people that are signed up to go. Yeah. So I think that's the first question. I think you're muted, Mike, or.
Yeah, I'm good for going. We haven't got anything to do that night.
Okay.
So I'll be there.
All right. So we'll go forward with it. And then the other question was, I think the next ones are like around the holiday time, right? So I don't know if we want to have a culture club around holiday time, but I think if we're gonna have this one, we should probably just decide then if we want to do it in December.
Oh, let's see. It would be December 21st.
And the 28th. Or no.
Oh yeah, it'd be December. Yeah,
The 14th and the 21st.
28th would be the Culture Club.
Okay.
Which I think we can decide on Wednesday when we have the culture club, whether we want to have it or not.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, that was it, but we can continue discussing.
Yeah, some
it.
people might be out of town between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah. We won't be, because we we had a long vacation, so we'll
I
be
have
here.
to work the 28th.
Oh,
Yeah. That means I get priority next year. And I'm taking the 21st and 22nd off, so.
But yeah, we can, sorry about that. We can continue discussing psychics. I did have one question. I'll remember if anyone wants to ask any other questions.
I just got an important message on my phone that from Groupon.com that I can get a foot reflexology session for just $30.
whoa.
Massage parts of your feet which are connected to parts of your body for health. Yep.
Yeah, my feet are connected to my body.
Ugh. I get so much crap from Groupon. It's like Reiki stuff and all kinds of stuff like that. It's amazing. So it's connected with the psychics, and it's amazing to me what in this country people can advertise and get paid for it, which is like no proof that any of it works, and it doesn't matter. So, you know, talking about the psychics in that regard, Bob Nygaard tells me, like, if you go in and you get ripped off by a psychic and you spend thousands or tens of thousands of dollars for these made up, you know, sessions, the law can't do anything about it at all. The only thing he can get prosecuted is if they take money that they say they're going to return to you and don't, which is like a special level of amazing crime that can happen. But they'll often say, like, your money is cursed, or in order to remove the curse, you need to give me this cash. At some point, I'll return it to you, but they don't give me more cash. And then that cash never gets returned. And that's what can be prosecuted. But you can tell people that you're doing all these magical things for them and take their money, and there's no law against that. And you can sell them reflexology and all this other crap, and there's no protections. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's also very sad.
In your analysis, did you look at like the psychic that was like the best predictor?
Yeah, I actually asked Richard that before I went on stage in SciCon, because I thought that might come up there. It didn't come up as a question, but he said there was nothing that jumped out at him at all. Yeah, it was funny. We started calling the average was 11%. It's actually 10.7 or something like that. It was slightly below 11. So we kept calling 11% the Saunders number, because early on, any way we looked at the database, if it was a large enough set, it was 11% was right. Whether you broke it down by a type of a thing, as I showed you some, like the Trump prediction was 11%, and like war was, most of them were like 11% by any kind of category, and that also applied if there were enough by a particular person. So it's kind of weird that so we called it the Saunders number.
And have you try to continue to collect more data, or is this
No, I think he's done. He's done this for 20 years of his life. So yeah. So, you know, he wanted to get the data, he wanted to see what the results were, and he's got it out there. We published it all over the place. If anyone else wants to replicate it in another country, that would be great. You know, I actually talked to the guy who does the Rationable podcast from India, Chandra, and I put the idea in his head to do it in India. So he was interested. We'll see, but it's a lot of effort, a lot of work, and I don't know if anyone's ever going to actually feel they have the time to do that. And you know, all right, Australia is an entire company, but it's also a country, but it's actually kind of small. So I looked up the relative population, and Australia is as big as Florida. So right, if we were to do America, you know, it would be 10 times the amount of psychics and predictions or whatever in the same time period.
Be a lot of media to feed through.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah, it would be staggering. Yeah, as far as we know, the most the largest things that have been done previously were, in fact, the Bay Area Skeptics did it at one point. I think Richard mentioned in his talk to them. He dug back through the archives and found it. There was 1 year maybe it was in the 90s, I don't remember, where, okay, let's do this for this year. So they dug out the stuff that they could find in print in magazines for 1 year, and they looked at that. But, this was the whole entire country there, and it was for 21 years. So, it was probably as all-encompassing as you could reasonably get, especially because it was in a time partly before it was easy to document things. Like, the internet was just really starting back in 2000, and it was kind of hard to get copies of things. He would literally spend a lot of time going, I don't know if you do this anymore, he went to microfilm things in libraries. That's old style thing. It probably would be easier these days to get those sorts of things found. Oh, and by the way, when he started doing this to try to score the predictions, like before the internet, I don't know how you did that. It's quite amazing how fast it's advanced in the 20 years since he started it. But now you could pretty much find anything online. Not everything. Clearly, we had a very small percent that were unknown. A lot of the statistical stuff, but it is amazing what is available online to find out about things that happened in the last couple of decades. And we learned a lot doing that. We had all these bookmarks of, this is a good source whenever they ask about rainfall. This is a good source whenever they talk about what the stock exchange did in Australia. So yeah, I don't know how you would have done this 20 years ago. It would have been really impossible, I think, to try to score these predictions. I probably should have brought that up in the presentation. I never thought about it till now. But yeah, it was a thing that just wasn't easy enough to do, to get it done until fairly recently.
And do you think that it could be published as a scientific paper?
That was one of the questions. That was one of the questions asked at SciCon, interestingly. And I didn't really have a good answer for it, because I don't know how you do this scientifically. Other than you do a thing like the challenge of, you say, okay, somebody's got a claim or agree to a test. Here's the test standard. Now take the test and see what happens. I don't know how you do that with a large group of people.
Or like just publish this data, like in the results that you have.
Oh, so you're asking, could it be published in a scientific journal?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another question. I don't know what journal this would associate with. I wonder. That's a good question. I'll have to ask Richard that. I don't know. He talked about writing a book, actually, at one point, putting all this in a book. That would be another way to publicize it at some point. But I don't know, like, what journal would you? So this is part of the problem about this whole thing. So Susan Gerbic has made it her her sphere of understanding to research psychic mediums, understand how they rip people off. And one of them pushed back a lot because she wrote a lot of papers about him, and that's Thomas John. And he would say things like, oh, I don't care if you think you stung me, even if the New York Times wrote about it and you think you proved I got all of my information from Facebook accounts that you set up. You're not a scientist, right? You're a baby photographer at JCPenney, that's what he said. So, how could you know? A scientist is the only one who could figure out whether I'm a fraud. He didn't use those words, but that was his gist. How would a scientist do that? So, I actually had this conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson. We were talking about skepticism versus science. And, science pushes the boundary of human understanding. And that's what the scientists do. They don't want to spend time defending stuff we know, from that's already been proved, from charlatans or people who don't understand it. That's the skeptic purview, right? It's basically the skeptic world's, point of view is to hold the line and remind people of what we already know, and know astrology is not real. You're not going to get any scientific journal writing about astrology not being real. And I think this is similar to that. I mean, there's no evidence that psychics have any powers. Why are scientists going to get involved with it?
Yeah. I think Andy had a question.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, do you think it would be anything related to that? A lot of this stuff is encouraged You go online. In fact, I once found something online where you can see if you have psychic powers, and it gives you 4 cards. You click on one, and it gives you a random image. And if you guess the image, you have psychic powers. And I found that when you keep doing it, the best strategy is to keep consecutively clicking on the same card, and your rate of guessing it actually goes up, because I mean it's a 25% chance you're going to get it right anyway. But it can affirm in somebody's mind that they have powers when they don't. They're just plain basic games of chance.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Did anybody see the Goop Lab?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember the
Netflix,
last
right?
episode? All about Gwyneth Paltrow's personal psychic medium.
I didn't see the last episode.
Oh, that's probably good. It was very hard to not be nauseated watching the entire thing. Yeah, the 5th episode was on energy healing, and it was Gwyneth Paltrow's personal Reiki master, chiropractor, who was like seen lifting people off of tables with invisible beams of energy, and it was astounding to watch this. And then the last episode outdid that by showcasing her personal psychic medium. The episode's name was "Are You Into It?" INTUIT, intuitive, in other words. And it was basically, the gist was, oh no, not only is she psychic, but everyone's a psychic medium, and you just have to practice. Just what Andy was saying. And it was like, you know, reinforcement of how you could all learn to be psychic mediums. And I showed you the Sarasota Spirit University, which teaches people that. And that's their message too. We all have this power. You just have to learn to do it.
I hate to say though, Penn and Teller, they do it a lot better.
What about Penn and Teller?
Oh, they have a whole skit on just psychics and that, and it's absolutely hilarious whenever they perform. And I mean, granted, I love the group, but it's like they do a lot of credit to it. It's really actually a good point. And then also, I think there's another point we left out is a lot of times people re-strengthen neural pathways with reaffirming this. And I think maybe if we, you know, somehow just watching Penn and Teller do these prediction types of magic and how they actually do it might reveal how psychics pull off their craft.
Oh yeah. Some of the best debunkers of these people are mentalists, and one of them was mentioned before, Mark Edward. Yeah, he's Susan's partner, and they went, and they're the ones who went to Thomas John's reading and were called upon because, you know, they had fake Facebook profiles, and Thomas John read them back everything that was on Facebook that was all made up by other people. And, you know, he was part of setting that up, and he's helped Susan do other stings. It's one of the reasons that skeptic organizations, you know, have a large representation, and were also somewhat founded, like James Randi, and you know, people who understand how people are deceived. And scientists are not good at that, right? Because scientists trust the data, and this is why they fail at, you know, determining whether or not somebody has paranormal powers. In the Skeptic Zone, Richard Saunders has this segment called Trove, where he goes back with you know, paper archives from hundreds of years sometimes, and just, it's all digitized. So he Googles a search term, and then that week he'll read about that search term. And sometimes he's reading stuff from the early 1900s, late 1800s. And it never fails to amaze me when there's a, you know, so-and-so chief scientist of this has watched psychic mediums, and he sees no way they could be fooling us, so therefore they have to be real. And this is a scientist saying this. Yeah. And you know, that's not just from the olden times. So, you know, the thing where Project Alpha happened in the 70s or 80s, where, you know, some prestigious paranormal university system with professors, I think it was in California, you know, announced its results that they were testing these people for years, and yes, they have powers, they can bend spoons and move things with their mind. And then after they made their announcement, James Randi came out with the guys and said, yeah, I want you to meet the two guys who were tested. And I still remember this from the YouTube video. And then the press asked, well, how did you do it? They go, we cheated. Because and it was amazing. James Randi was in touch with the people at this, at the lab,
yeah,
and was telling them what to look out for. And they were, we don't need your help. You know, because he felt bad about he's the one who sent them in there. And, you know, they thought they were too smart to be fooled, basically, even though he was telling them you can be fooled and this is how you can be fooled. Exactly what they were doing. Don't leave them alone. You know, when you mark things, make sure you mark it in this way. And they just didn't do it. And they were convinced because they already believed, because they were parapsychologists with some scientific degrees. And that's just, it's not helpful, because just because you've gotten a scientific degree doesn't mean you can't be fooled.
Yeah. And going back a little to like publishing the paper, I was thinking that like it's already difficult for scientists to just get funding and publish papers. You know, there's not a lot of money as a scientist. You don't make a lot of money, and there's also the need to publish something positive. You know, like if you do an experiment and then the result is not positive, there's a big push to you know, to not publish. So that's probably another reason, you know, why any skeptical things are probably not going to be published, because already like anything just negative probably won't be published. But yeah, I think we're past the time, so we're gonna probably end. But thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Rob, for the great presentation. And
Thank you for having me. I love talking about this, because spent a couple of years on it, and Richard spent decades. So I think the more people that know about it, the you know, the better it is.
All right, so yeah, we'll probably once the recording is done processing, we'll probably post it on YouTube, and I'll let Jeff handle some of that. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Hey.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.